Hey everybody, welcome to Drive Thru Review 501. Today we're going to take a look at Warhammer Quest Silver Tower. Now this is not a reprinting of the old Warhammer Quest that was set in the old kind of fantasy world, decades ago. It's now set in the Age of Sigmar theme and that new fantasy universe that the new Warhammer Fantasy game takes place in. Let's jump into exactly how the game works and all the cool components and stuff that you're going to get with this, and then I'll jump at the end of the review and tell you what I think and compare it a little bit to the old Warhammer Quest and give you my thoughts. Okay, here's everything that you get in the box. You get about 50 miniatures, you get a bunch of tiles, and the tiles represent this silver tower. As you can see, this is a very different kind of look to a normal kind of dungeon crawl type of game. It's got a very kind of psychedelic look. I think that's fits with Age of Sigmar. I'm not really into Age of Sigmar at all, but it's very different. You can see these kind of crystals here. So I really like how this looks, and frankly, it's one of the things that really drew me to the game in the first place. You can see this kind of weird, I don't know if that's carpet or what that is, these kind of runes on the floor and so on. And you got these neat passageways and stuff like that. So the tiles and stuff are very different, very unique for this game. Now the theme of the game is that you are in a band of adventurers that are exploring here the Silver Tower, and you could be going there for any number of reasons, to maybe lay waste and destroy the Gaunt Summoner, or just go in there and try to get riches and stuff out of the tower. You may have different motivations, which adds a kind of interesting role-playing aspect to some of the decisions you might actually make in the game. Here we can see the Gaunt Summoner. I'll try to keep this steady here. So this is the main bad fella that you're going to be interacting with, and I guess in typical Games Workshop faction, that's a very detailed miniature. You do have to assemble these yourself. It's not too bad. I wouldn't say if you're a novice at this, you're going to have the greatest time with it, but if you've done a few games like this, like I have, it's not too bad. There's some of the more easier to put together miniatures. I'll just give you another cool example of a nice miniature here. This is this thaumaturg, something or other, some kind of minotaur guy. He has probably the most pieces, and he's the biggest miniature for sure on this 50mm base here. You do have to glue them to the bases as well. So nice stuff. I will paint these, but I wanted to review them before I paint it, because it's going to be a few months probably before I finish painting these. Oh, and while we're looking at the miniatures, we'll just take a look at some of the heroes here. Here we have one of the knights that you get. This is really cool. I think this is sort of your stereotypical, prototypical Age of Sigmar character there. Pretty neat. I will say, in terms of the miniatures, like this guy is a little bit interesting to me. So this guy, you can see he's basically on 1 foot here to the base. So I predict that this will break off, or not break, but it'll come off its base at some point. And there's another character here that's also on a foot. This elf character here, and you can see he's basically just glued like that. So I don't know how efficient that is in terms of gameplay, but it looks really neat. It's a cool pose, and you can see there. So it's a very cool action-oriented pose, and some of the monsters are posed like that as well. It's stuck on there so far, and so I'm just going to show you some other guys here. So this is a horror. Okay, this guy will be painted pink. He's a pink horror, and so monsters come out in groups, but there's going to be different kinds of groups. This is probably one of the more interesting groups in the game, because there's a pink horror here. There's 2 of those in the game, and then you have a handful of these blue horrors, which are little smaller horrors like that. And then you have a yet smaller horrors, and you've got a few of these, and these are brimstone horrors. Let's see if you can zoom in there. That's the backside. So you can see there, maybe, these are little bitty horrors. So when you destroy these, they're going to kind of break apart and make smaller ones, and they're going to use different skills and different combinations, and that kind of thematically fits with the rest of these. So you're going to have these Carrick acolytes. So you can see this guy here, he actually has a blade there as well as a shield on him, and you can take a look at another guy who's got a glaive and no shield. And so these guys are actually going to have different abilities. So as the game tells you to put the different monsters out, they're going to behave slightly differently, maybe roll more or less dice. Their stats are going to be slightly different based on the models that you put out there. So let's talk about how the game's going to work. You're going to work through 8 trials and then have a final combat meeting with the Gaunt Summoner. And you have an intro trial that you have to do first, but then you can kind of pick and choose. And based on which trial you choose, you're going to go through this deck here of encounter cards and then take some out based on the symbol, and the trial will tell you, which one. So it'll say, grab all of these with this symbol, or grab anything that has, this green symbol on it. And then mix those up, and it's going to tell you which one is sort of the target location that you're trying to get to. You'll shuffle this one, for example, in with a couple, and then you'll shuffle the rest on top of that. So you're going to be kind of exploring the cave, or excuse me, not the cave in this case, but exploring the tower, encountering these different rooms. And so there might be, the same sort of tile that it tells you to grab, but some of the encounter stuff and information in the story is going to be a little bit differently depending on which trial you're going through. So you're going to shuffle those up, and then you're going to try to make your way through. And the goal is at the end of these to grab one of these shards. And once you get all 8 of these, then you can sort of trigger the final encounter with the Gaunt Summoner. And so the order of the tiles are going to be different each time. You also have this random event book that is going to give you different events. And now there's going to be a number of entries here in this adventure book. Here at the beginning it tells you, which trials to pick. You always do the same one at the start, and then you go through here, and then some of the encounters will tell you to flip to a specific entry. You'll read that, and it has to do with exactly the encounter or the quest that you're currently on. Sometimes you'll have a random event and you roll 2d6, and then you'll go and look up some kind of event that happens. And so the tower itself is very much alive and sort of reacting and trying to mess with you to different degrees. So let's take a look at a little bit about the gameplay and how that works. So each player is going to get a character sheet here. In the case of this War Priest, they get a little familiar buddy that is going to be around them. So he's got this little Griffin Hound there. And we can take a look here at the Warrior Priest model as well. So you're going to get that, you get your figure, and then you're going to take a color of dice, a set of dice in your color. So you take 4 red dice or whatever color you choose. And this is going to drive the actions that you can do. So every turn you're going to roll some dice, you'll put them on here, and then as you spend them, then that will be the 4 actions that you get. And once you're done spending your actions, then your turn is done. You can see you can activate different abilities based on what you have here. So if we take a look here, you can attack with the Warhammer basically with any die, 1+. And then you'll roll a die, and on a 3+, you'll do a hit, and then you'll do 1 damage. But to do this Light of Sigmar, you need a 6+ to activate it, and it will activate on the whole area, the whole tile that you're currently on. So if he was on here, he would damage anything on that tile. And then here you can see he'll do 1 damage, you only need a 2+. But then he's got some special abilities. He could use a 2+ die to give a command here to his little dog. And then he can do a little heal action here on a 3+. So each of these different characters is going to have these different abilities. And then you can see he can have a move. So when you do a move action, you can move 3 spaces. If he gets a hit done on him, you roll to save. In his case, you have to roll a 6+, which is pretty difficult. And then if you move and you're adjacent to an enemy figure here and you're trying to move away, you have to make an agility test here and then beat that number, or match that number or beat it, to be able to move away. And the monster adversaries have that as well. Now, like I said, the game does come with 6 of these. There are several available that you can get, and there's actually an app for those. Talk a little bit more about the app in the review, but there's like an iPhone app and an Android app that you can get to generate more heroes. And then you can go and purchase those models kind of separately from Games Workshop. Now you're going to decide one player to get this rune marker here, and that's going to be the start player, and then players are going to take turns going around to the left. You can pass a turn, so if you feel like it's better to act in a slightly different order, you can. Then the next round you'll pass this around the table, then they'll start. Now the player that has this, before they even roll their dice to take their actions, they're going to roll the destiny dice. So here we have this board here, and there's 2 stacks of cards, and then there's a little destiny wheel there. So you're going to roll 5 purple dice here as the player with the rune marker, and then you're going to remove, oh, look at that miracle, I didn't roll any doubles. So I rolled 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now if I had rolled doubles, let's say instead of this 2, I had rolled 2 6s. So what's going to happen is any dice that match, you're going to remove all those dice. So in this case, we're just left with a 1, a 3, and a 5, and then we'll put these onto the board here. Whoops. And then these are going to be extra dice that you can spend on your turn. Now what happens to these removed dice here? Well, on the very first turn of your very first quest, nothing happens. But every time after that, you're going to take a look, and you're going to look on the back of the rule book here, and you can see this says Consequences of Destiny. So if you removed any 1s or 6s, and again, if you got triple 6s, you'd remove all the 6s in that case too. So if you remove any 1s or 6s, then you're actually going to roll, and you're going to have one of those encounters out of the adventure book that I talked to you about earlier. Or you could have some other things actually spawn these familiars. So there's 4 different types of familiars in the game, and these are sort of little friends of the Gaunt Summoner, the main sort of baddie. So you can see this little book that walks around. You've got this here. We have our own not safe for work name for this, but I'm just going to call it a fish. It's a BA fish. And so these guys will actually spawn, and they'll have little debuffs and things that you can do, but you can actually encounter them and try to capture the familiars if they come out, and you can see you'll hold on to them, and you can actually discard them later for a boon to get a little buff. But if you try to capture them and you fail, then they'll hurt you. And while they're out, they're going to be, you know, debuffing you or buffing up the characters or the creatures that are with them. So depending on if you roll doubles there, something bad will happen. But these dice now are available for players to spend. So if I was the warrior priest and I was doing my turn, let's say I wanted to take and spend this 3 to activate my heal. So I'll do that, but then when I do that, the highest die remaining is going to lock, and I can no longer spend that this turn. At the end of my turn, any lock dice will go back to available. So that keeps one player from just kind of bogarting the dice and taking a whole bunch of extra actions. But let's say I lock that and I spent this other one to maybe do an attack, then there's no more dice. There's no more dice to lock. So at the end of my turn, this will go back. Now, the last player on the turn that takes a turn doesn't have to lock any dice. So if we'd gone through our turn as a group, and then the 3rd or 4th player, whatever, however number of players you're playing with, had all these dice available, then they could go ahead and just use them all. So sometimes you might save them up to say, you know, hey, we'll give Francesca a little bit of an opportunity to do some really cool abilities this turn. Now, the other thing to note is during your turn, as you kill different monsters, you're going to get renown. Now, each player will have a marker, and this color will match the dice that you're using. So if we're using the red dice, you'll be the red marker. And every time you kill a creature to gain renown, you're going to move up this track like so. And each character has a renown ability. So if we look here at the warrior priest again, if Sigmar's boon, that's your heal ability, heals 2 wounds in a turn, you'll also gain a renown. So there's all kinds of different ways and strategies and things that will kind of force your player to maybe run in there or be a little crazy, go in and try to act as a tank. So those kind of renown abilities will sort of balance, you know, with the rest of your abilities. So you get more renown as you go. And then every time you make kind of a full lap around this, you're going to be able to take and draw 2 skill cards. And you'll take a look at these, and you'll keep one and then put the other one at the bottom of the deck. And then you may or may not actually get to keep these 4 future adventures, which I'll talk about in a minute. And over here, these are treasure cards, and different effects will give you treasure cards that you can spend and hold on to. And you may or may not be able to keep these as well. If you do use them, that's usually always, I think they're all discard abilities, so it's a one-shot use for these. So again, the start player with this marker will roll the destiny dice, and then each player at the beginning of their turn will roll these dice. You don't roll it until the start of your turn. And then in addition to all the actions and attacks and things you may have here, there are a few sort of basic actions, and they're on the back of the rule book here as a reminder. You can explore, move, or recuperate. So move is very simple. You spend a die, and then you can move up to your allotted move value. Again, rolling agility if you're adjacent to a figure at the start of your move there. And you move that many spaces. If you're at the edge of one of these doorways here, these kind of like mystical looking portal doorways, you can spend a die to explore, and that's when you'll grab a card off the top of the deck of these encounters that you've shuffled together. Now this is a very, very interesting thing, because let's say you move into, let's say we had moved into here, right? And there's actually 2 exits. So what you'll do is you will take whatever your deck is that you assembled and start dealing cards off the bottom to each of these exits. So this is kind of an interesting way. So you know these encounters are where they are, but you're like, okay, I think the encounter we're going for could be over here, but maybe we're not ready for it, because sometimes there's not necessarily a prerequisite, but there's stuff you want to do before you get to, you know, the final boss encounter. So you might try to go a certain way. So these will kind of split up, and it gives you kind of interesting choices. And as you kind of move your figures through, at the end of your turn, you're going to see what kind of adjacent figures and tiles are there. And so the tiles will start to drop off. So it's basically the tile that has the most heroes on it is sort of the current tile. Anything adjacent to that and anything adjacent to those, so kind of like 3 tiles away or 2 tiles away, is going to stay, and then eventually these will start dropping off. And so if you actually have a figure that's way far away, or you actually draw a tile that would go over and overlap, it will blow that up, and then your hero will take what's called a grievous wound. So they're kind of effectively knocked out. And if you ever take damage, enough damage, you'll get knocked out too, which I'll explain in a minute. So then you've got to wait to bring them back into play or sort of wake them up. So it gives us a real interesting sense of the tower itself being very sort of 4-dimensional in a lot of ways. You know, there's time and space, and you're going into these weird different rooms and everything. So that's a cool way to do it. But again, when you do the explore action, then you draw the top card off, reveal it, and then you put out whatever, you know, tile it tells you to put out, and then it'll actually have you roll an encounter table, maybe read an entry in the adventure book. If you look here at the encounter table on the back of the rule book, it'll tell you which table to roll on. Sometimes you roll a 2d6 or a d6, and this will usually tell you to put out some monsters. So you just put out the monsters as close to the center as possible. So this maybe tell you to put out, you know, a number of horrors equal to the number of players and so on. And sometimes, I should say actually, looking at this, sometimes it's hard to tell, but you can see this sort of has a black line around it. So that is obstructs line of sight, and, you know, figures can't move through there. So it's a little bit hard to tell sometimes with this tile because they're so sort of psychedelic. So anyway, you'll put these out, and then they'll be there, and then you can keep taking your turn to move in and try to attack. Once all the players have done their turn, then you'll activate the adversaries. And again, you're going to go into the rule book here, and you're going to look at these different groups. Now, I'm just going to spoil the review a little bit. This is a little bit of a pain to keep going in the book. So what I did is actually printed out a lot of this stuff on some cardstock. And so let's say these horrors here activated. And so you're going to take a look. This may have some information that you really need to read as you spawn them, because different things might happen, or you need to kind of know what the different models and stuff might do, especially with the Gaunt Summoner. He's got some different effects, and the way that they behave when you kill them might be a little bit different. But this is going to show you what they're capable of. Now these horrors, like I told you, there's blue, pink, and brimstone horrors. And so they have a different move, attack, and their vigor is their hit points. So based on which one it is, pink, blue, or brimstone, you're going to have that number. But what you're going to do is you're going to pick a group. So if there's a horrors and then there was the acolytes, you pick one of the groups. Whoever is the current holder of the rune marker can make the decision. You pick whatever order you want. Then you roll in the behavior table, and then these will do different things based on what you roll. They might try to, you know, back away from you and do some range fire. They may even try to run away and escape. They might be very aggressive and try to focus around one of the heroes. And the way combat works, and it works the same for the heroes and the villains here, is you're going to roll. You've got the 2 hit number there, like that. So you're going to roll 2 or 3 plus, and then you'll have a kind of damage. So you do damage, you know, 1 damage or D3 damage. There may be modifiers out there. If you get a stun on one of the adversaries, you'll put this little stun marker on them, and that means they don't actually activate during their turn, and then the stun marker will come off, so they kind of skip a turn. And then once you do enough damage to them, like I said, unless you're playing with the horrors, you'll just take some renown, but these will actually break apart and go into smaller and smaller horrors and so on. Now in the case of the heroes, if damage is done to them, they get a chance to save. So if I got 2 hits on me, then I would need a 4+ to save. So I'll roll these 2 dice, and so neither of those was able to save it. The Night Quester has a cool ability. If you actually get a save with a 6, then you get some extra renown. But as you take damage, you're going to start to fill in these dice slots here, and then you can get healed and you'll remove those. But once you fill this in, then you're not going to be able to use any dice except for possibly the Destiny dice. If you take another damage at this point, then you're grievously wounded, similar to if you get left behind in the dungeon. So you're going to take your model off of the board and leave him there. And then the next time you have what's called a respite phase, or basically get to camp for a turn, then he can come back on the board. He'll still have his wounds, but then you'll be able to roll a D3, you know, which is a D6 divided by 2, and then remove that many wounds. Now let's talk about the respite phase. If there are no adversaries on the board at all, then all the players can regroup in the current area, and that's just where the most heroes are. If it's a tie, then whatever the newest explored one. So everybody will regroup there. When you do that, you're going to roll a die and then add the number of skill cards that characters have in front of them. So if you have a total of 9, you have 2 of these and you roll a 6, you're going to get an 8. If that happens though, if you roll a 9 or higher, then you're going to be ambushed. If you're not ambushed, then you can choose to either heal or search. So you roll again D3, and then you heal that much, or you can roll to search. If you roll a 4 or higher, then you'll be able to draw a treasure card off the treasure deck. And there's other events and things that allow you to get treasure as well. Now, if you get ambushed, then a bunch of monsters are going to come into the nearest portal, and then they're going to get the jump on you before you have a chance to do your turn. Now, if you would have like 2 respites in a row, let's say you had, a bunch of no figures at the end of this turn, and then you kind of explore, because sometimes the dungeon gets big. It kind of depends. It can be very small or big. But let's say you're like, oh, we need to backtrack all the way to here to get back to this stack of cards because we went down this sort of dead end. So if you were to have kind of 2 turns where there were no monsters at the end of the turn, then you'll have to roll again on the adventure book, and then the dungeon will kind of come alive because there's no monsters there, and maybe spawn dungeons, or they maybe make the room that you're in sort of like a trap, which is cool because you won't necessarily just be fighting all the time. You'll be sort of encountering this tower. It kind of has a life of its own. After you go through the encounter, you find the chamber that you're trying to get to. You'll have some kind of boss fight usually, and then you will get one of these shards here. So again, as you get all 8 of these shards, then you'll be able to trigger just the final boss fight at the end of the game. So there's kind of like 8 trials and then the final boss fight. And you can kind of go in and redo trials. It's very mystical sort of theme, but I'll talk more about that in the review. You'll roll a die for your treasure cards to see if you get to keep those if you didn't use them on that turn or on that adventure. And you can keep skill cards based on the number of the shards that you've collected. So if you failed the first time and you didn't get any shards, then your skill cards are deleted. If you've got a shard, everybody can keep up to 1, and then you can keep up to 2. It caps out at 4 skill cards that you can keep, and then you can just kind of keep these or write these down here, which each character had. But this is basically the kind of the persistence or leveling up is just these skill cards. There's no like town phase or anything like the old game. The other thing that these amulet fragments will do is for each of these, once per game, you can sort of activate them for a special ability. So you can either do one of 3 things. You can heal, you can try to re-roll your action dice, or re-roll your destiny dice. So once you do that with the 1, then you've activated it, and then maybe if you have a second one, you could do that ability again. But that's kind of once per trial kind of thing. But that's the gist of the game. You're going to be rolling 4 dice or less if you've been wounded, and then moving around, fighting creatures, trying to explore and find the different encounter cards that you're going after, dealing with some of the stories that are randomly driven and also driven by the encounters themselves. They're really kind of trying to maximize the skills and everything that are available on these different heroes. Okay, so that's Warhammer Quest Silver Tower. What do I think of it? Let me get some of the quibbles out of the way first before I talk about the stuff that I like, and there's a lot that I do like about the game. First thing is the app here, and I'll just kind of show you that a little bit there. So there's this app that seems like it could be neat because it allows you to sort of fire up a character, and you can say, okay, I'm going to play the Night Quester, put him in here. You can have it randomly roll dice, and it builds up like a little character card on your phone. And then you can do that as you get skills. You can add it, so you can kind of easily flip through, and you can sort of buy extra heroes in the app itself. Now, when you buy it in the app, I think they're $1 a piece, or you can buy them all for like $20-something. Then it gives you the card, but in the sort of virtual form that you could use. So like I said, the game comes with 6 of these cards. So you have 6 characters, but if you wanted to go buy like the Lord Plague figure from Games Workshop and then use that in here, and then you'd be able to go into the app and use that. Because when you buy the figure, it doesn't come with the card itself. So that's like a little bit wonky to me that you would go and pay, let's say $20 to $30 for the model, and then an extra $1. I mean, it's only $1, but an extra $1 for the card to use it, and it's only on your phone. And the other thing that would be interesting with the app is if you could control multiple characters at once. So like you could do a party of 4, and you can kind of go through your turn. It would sort of kind of drive that. So I think that would make it really fun to solo the game as well, because you could go to the next character, next character, next character, and so on, and then kind of drive them all. But as it stands, you can only control 1 at a time here. And so the app's cool, like it's kind of neat, but it's also, why do I got to pay an extra $20 just to have the cards? But it's also not that much when you look at it, because it's like $1 per figure. So, and you're probably already spending, a few bucks to get the figure itself. So that's kind of strange. But I think there's room for improvement there, and I'm kind of 50-50. You can see I'm kind of waffling on the app a little bit. So the other thing is, like I said, going into and then looking up encounters and stuff for the different monsters, like the horror I showed you. So that's kind of a pain. I always go in there and look, like, because you're going to be encountering monsters a lot, and you want to kind of keep the rule book as the rule book and the adventure book as the adventure book, and not always be flipping. Now, I'm probably making more of this than I should, but I just don't like that they're in books. I would like to have had these, you know, just loose like this, but I printed them out so in the story. Where I'm kind of circling back to is the game is $100 to $150 depending on where you buy it. Now granted, you're getting a boatload of awesome miniatures, so that more than makes up for the cost, but sort of from the board gamer mind, you're kind of like, well, if I'm paying $100 for a board game, then I want everything to be really well polished. And so the miniatures meet the mark, exceed the mark, the tiles, and you know, this kind of the cool theme of everything, all the components in general kind of meet that mark. But then you see something like this weirdness with the app and all that stuff. So it's just kind of living in two worlds in my mind from the component perspective. What I'm really trying to do is kind of set expectations, because if you're a miniatures person, then you may just buy this for the miniatures and use them in Age of Sigmar, which you could do. And you might, you know, eBay off the rest of the components for 10 bucks. But if you're a board gamer, or you might still play the board game as well, but if you're a board gamer, you want kind of everything to be in the box. You don't really want to have to do a whole ton of extra work. So again, you've got to put these together and probably paint them so they're not all gray, at least. So just kind of know that going in. So the expectations are going to be a little bit different. So I think it's kind of succeeds though. Let's get to the fun part. It succeeds at meeting kind of both levels of demand. I think miniature people should be happy with it because the miniatures are great. You know, they look great. They're awesome to put together. I can't wait to paint these. And also, I think it's going to satisfy the board gamer because the game mechanics itself, the way that the game flows and works out, is really, really cool. And I talked a lot about the encounter deck, how you set that up per adventure, and you kind of mix that up, and the way that you explore, and the way that kind of deck will split and separate and go to different areas, because you're like, okay, we walked in here and there's 2 more exits, and we go down the left door or we go down the right door, and you don't know what you're going to encounter. And the stuff that you're going to encounter on those cards and in the adventure book is very kind of chaotic. So I can't remember the name of the thing that this guy is. Is it a Tarentic or something? It's a Age of Sigmar thing. It's a Zintic. I can't say it. So they're sort of like the chaos of the fantasy world. This is like a little bit more relatable to a 40K style fantasy or something. Like I said, I'm not into that whole world at all, but this is sort of like your chaos group. And so they do a lot of crazy sort of just out of the norm kind of wacky things that are going to happen. And the game really fits that because you feel like you're in this sort of growing and breathing tower. You've got these familiars that are going to pop up. They're going to harass you, which is really cool. I didn't talk about how this works mechanically, but so when a familiar comes out, it's going to maybe buff up all of the adjacent monsters or all the monsters on the tile. And when you can actually move on to the same space as a familiar, and then you try to immediately capture it. Now, if you fail to capture, it's going to do something like, you know, hurt you or blow up all the rest of your dice that you haven't spent that turn. But if you do capture it, you basically roll d6. If you roll 1, 2, 3, it hurts you. If you 4, 5, or 6, you capture it and keep it. And then you can discard it and then get a cool little boon or special effect to do that. So that's really cool that these familiars come in, they're flying around, they're just these little tiny things that are maybe these living books that are flapping and jumping around. You know, and then you can try to wrestle them down and keep the magic out of them. So that's kind of interesting. Now, the thing that this doesn't have that the old Warhammer Quest has, and I think a lot of people kind of miss, is the sort of epic campaign. You get experience points, you can go to town and have a little town phase where you roll a d6 to see if you got mugged, and all that kind of stuff. And it kind of could be this open-ended sort of role-playing experience. Now, this doesn't have that because it's strictly 9 trials, and that's it. Now, that's going to be very different based on the heroes that you play with and kind of just the randomness of everything that's going to happen combined with the encounter deck and everything. I really like this for what it is, though. I don't think it's going to even replace Warhammer Quest at all. Now, I feel like that's kind of been replaced to a degree by Shadows of Brimstone, which is like your whole open-ended campaign with a town phase and all this just crazy, huge, just a massive amounts of material that's available for that. So I think if you want that game, it exists right now readily. You can go get Shadows of Brimstone. This is more akin to the the Dungeons and Dragons adventure board game or Galaxy Defenders, any of those kind of co-op dungeon crawls. That's where this goes. Now, this is more like playing Claustrophobia, which is actually a 2-player only game, but it's also a dungeon crawl. But this is more like a co-op Claustrophobia with more than 2 players, and it's really neat. The dice mechanic in this game is awesome. I love how it works because you roll your dice, you've got your different possibilities, you've got the Destiny dice that you can use, but even that Destiny dice thing is really neat because you roll it and you roll a bunch of doubles and then the dungeon just kind of backfires at you and there's just familiars everywhere, or there's some kind of encounter that's going to happen. Or you can have a really good Destiny roll and then you've got all of these extra actions and you really kind of are discussing about how to best use them and stuff. So that mechanic is very, very interesting at how you sort of balance what your choices are for that round. And then as you get more skills and stuff, you can get some kind of mitigation, like give dice to people, get some re-rolls. And so it has that good crunchy kind of, dice choosing kind of mechanic that you see like in a lot of Euros and everything. So it's very neat. And then just that Destiny dice, I keep going back to that because you can have a turn where like the Destiny dice are just like, they hose you and you're like, why? I don't even want to roll these now because you're not doing that great in an encounter. It's like, please, I don't want to roll the Destiny dice because our backs are already against the wall. And then you roll it, and then like you get a miracle, like you saw in the video, and you roll like you get to keep 4 of them, and you're like, oh my gosh, now we have all these extra options. So it's a real kind of morale swinger, that Destiny thing, and it fits kind of thematically with, kind of being lost in this weird tower that really doesn't sit in a time and place, and you kind of feel like you're going into other dimensions, and just kind of the mechanics of everything really lends itself to this theme, which is very, very unexpected actually for me. You definitely feel like you're lost a lot of times. Like it feels like you've walked in this tower and you should never have stepped foot in this tower, and it's going to conspire against you. And some of the way some of the skills and some of the encounters really kind of back all that up. So the persistence is very simple. You keep maybe some treasures to some skills, and as you go along you can keep more skills, so your characters will definitely level up. And so there's a little bit of that. And it fits the theme of this, where you've walked into this tower and you've really made a gambit by stepping in here in the first place. And the way that first trial also unfolds, and then you kind of see what you have in store for you after you sort of have this conversation with one of the characters. I don't want to spoil anything. And the way that goes, and then you sort of have to go through this sort of gauntlet that he presents to you. The combat is pretty neat. That's probably the weakest part mechanically is, you roll a d6 to see if you hit, and then, you roll a d6 to see if you save on a hit. So that's a little bit on sort of the basic side, but I think it kind of is mitigated by just kind of the overall dice placement thing. So I know a lot of folks don't like a d6 combat where it's just very straightforward. It's kind of, do I succeed or fail based on what feels like random luck. But the way that the abilities go, and you can kind of, possibly have re-rolls, or again, use dice in different ways, kind of gets around that. So you can say, at the end, you're still having the combat of a d6, but based on all the different special abilities and stuff that you can do, you've set yourself up a little bit better to not be so reliant on that. It's kind of difficult to explain without going through a lot of skills and everything, but so I definitely recommend the game. Again, it's a little bit on the pricey side, but the quality of the miniatures and the components and everything is really neat. You can, like I said, go and really kind of flesh out the game. You can just go to Games Workshop. I know there's an expansion coming out that I've already ordered, but it has 4 heroes in it. But again, those don't have the cards for the heroes, which is a pain. So what I did is actually went to, where are those? Oh, here. So I went to Kiko's and printed them out. So I got online and found a Photoshop template and printed these guys out just so I could have nice looking cards, and for some of the other characters that I'm going to be getting. So it's cool that you can like take in, there's like 25 different heroes that you can go and find, like, oh, that one looks cool, this one looks cool, and go add, you know, get like 5 or 6 of them and add them to your game. But then it's kind of a pain to go and, you know, I have to go into the app, but then I have to be on my phone to use the character. I mean, I'm not against apps and games. I mean, if you anybody who's watched this channel, they know that, but it's just, it's a little bit clunky, that part of it. But on the other hand, you can just go do what I did, but not everybody's going to want to do that. So I highly recommend the game. It's really fun. It's really interesting. It's a very different kind of dungeon crawl. I think if I had to kind of compare it now to, you know, the new Descent with the app that Descent has, you know, these two are probably right up there with each other. And then Galaxy Defenders is also right up there in that kind of upper echelon, I think, of some of the better dungeon crawls that are out there that are co-op and everything. And I think folks that are more into, I think if you like claustrophobia though, you really got to take a look at this one. Claustrophobia is one of my favorite games, and this really feels a lot like claustrophobia, but just, you know, you can play it multiplayer first of all, and it's a little bit more, I don't know how to say this, but I think just because there's so many different characters that are available that you can get, it seems like this is going to be a little bit more living and breathing. And if they do support it, then it's going to be something that's kind of worth your initial investment of the $100, and then you can kind of trick it out as new things come out for it. But the takeaway for me is really the theme, and that's what really roots the game for me into something that I really enjoy. Like, if this was your standard kind of dwarves and elves and knights and all that, going into a dungeon, finding the wizard and all of that kind of stuff, this would not really work. But because they're in this kind of bizarro Age of Sigmar world with this weird guy, this gaunt summoner thing, and it's the living, breathing, chaotic tower, it really, really works. And that, to me, what it kind of makes it special in my mind is that, because all of these other dungeon crawls, Descent and the D&D games and a lot of these other ones, are just your traditional, like, hey, we want to do a dungeon crawl too. And this isn't like an also ran, you know, it's not like, it's like, oh, me too kind of thing, or let's cash in on the Warhammer Quest thing. I mean, they are kind of doing that a little bit, but it is Warhammer, the new Warhammer, and it does fit the co-op dungeon crawl. But everything that they've chosen here really works well together. All the mechanics with the theme, you know, it really comes alive, and so it feels very immersive because of that. I mean, it feels like you're in this tower, not just in like a cave, or you're in some wizard's tower that just kind of is stagnant, you know. It's very much a living, breathing game. And the difficulty and all that stuff, it really, really works. It can be, I think difficulty is perfect actually for it. So you can get beat down, you can't have all your characters lose, then you just go and you try another trial again. You can pick and choose and do whatever trials you want. It works really, really well. So I highly recommend it if you can afford that initial investment and you want to spend some time with it. I think with this, the miniatures are, you know, I think you want to paint these, you want to create the photocopies of stuff, and really it's got that kind of hobby aspect to it that you really want to put into it. I mean, if you just want to like not put the stuff together, and you know, that's a pain, and I understand. I mean, I totally get that, because I didn't used to want to put any of this stuff together before either. I think if you want to invest that extra time into it, then that's where I think you're safe. If you want to put the time into it, put all that stuff into it, go for it. Put the money in. I think you're going to be rewarded by it. But anyway, that's Warhammer Quest Silver Tower. Not like the predecessor, but I think a unique and special thing on its own. So I know I talked really long there, I apologize, but thanks.